Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Kaylee Felio. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director at PartsEdge. This month, we're going to be talking about parts reconciliation, and Chuck Hartley will be delivering the webinar. Chuck Hartley is one of the co-founders of PartsEdge. A lot of you may know him, but Chuck, take it away.
All right, Kaylee. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to cover probably the second or third most important thing that we typically hear from parts managers, and it has to do with parts reconciliation. We'll cover a lot of generalities and things that we've found through the years that may or may not help you as you go through this. I would like to think, since a lot of you are listening, either you're being proactive and you take care of this on a monthly basis, or you found out that you got a problem with your inventory. So, yeah, without that, we'll just jump right into it. And here's two statements. It's very fair to say, we can say over the years, we can live by these two statements that put the fear and anxiety into any parts manager. A, your physical inventory value is short. And B, your physical inventory value is over. That's typically what you get from the controller after there's been some reconciliation or whatever. But the one thing that really stands true is then the statement that puts every parts manager on edge is, parts manager, go find the issue. One of the things I want to emphasize up here as we really start to deal with this and get into the weeds is, if you have a question, this is a perfect time. If you hear something that hits a chord or you want to propose a question, right in the chat area, please type your question. We'll stop and deal with it. This seminar, after all, is really for you. As we deal with this day in and day out, month by month or over a year or whatever, a lot of the things we'll go through are things that we've experienced through shortages, overages, or whatnot. And we'll give you some of our real life type of situations that we've handled. And also, one of the things as we go through this month-end reconciliation, we say this every time that we've done it, and this is about the third time we've done it, is we do have a month-end reconciliation form for any DMS that you might have. So feel free to ask for that. We'll be more than happy to send you over our version that we've put together over the years, listening to different physical inventory companies and whatnot. So, parts manager, go find the issue. Isn't that just wonderful? Well, we talk a lot about being proactive versus reactive, and certainly in this arena, dealing with month-end reconciliation, that's very true. The basic idea is that if you're constantly stuck in the muck of emergencies, you're wearing 50 fire hats, it's impossible to really develop or make the big picture analysis of your parts operation. After all, you, the parts manager, you typically worry about two things when it comes to inventory control and managing the asset accounts. You buy and receipt parts in, and you sell them out. How these statements, invoices, shippers, whatever, end up in the office and get posted, that tends to be where the gap happens. So with that statement being said, trying to make the shift easy for many parts managers, it means getting a lot more help. Really trying to figure out, what do I need to give an accurate assessment of my parts operation to hand off to accounting? That's a critical part, and doing a monthly reconciliation is really the key. And we'll cover some of the reasons why that's really important. The monthly reconciliation, we've had times where we've had parts managers say, yeah, we fill out a sheet, we turn it in the office, then we never hear anything from them. And that gets very frustrating to a parts manager, that they go through and get the sheet ready, hand it off to the office, and the controller, the business manager, whoever, never really comes back and says, okay, you're X amount of dollars over, under, or whatnot. So monthly reconciliation, The power of doing a monthly reconciliation and auditing is really critical. Running a monthly reconciliation really helps to control the asset accounts for optimal data management. And the benefits of a monthly reconciliation really gets to, and you'll see this in the next slide as we bring it, why it's important, is because now, and I'll say this several times during this, because we've certainly seen this, is doing a monthly reconciliation, things stick out much quicker, and now you're trying to find a needle in a pincushion instead of a needle in a haystack. Early detection can really help prevent repetition of errors that are leading to imbalances within the asset account. And of course, that leads to better balanced books when you get to the month end, especially after you do a physical inventory. If you're doing monthly reconciliations and staying within a couple of percent either way, and I'll explain why, you're doing a really good job. And when you do a physical inventory, there should be absolutely no surprises. Why are monthly reconciliations important? Again, it gives you a snapshot of inventory accuracy compared to general accounting. It helps to catch errors, again, before they're repeated. And most importantly, at the end of the year, whether you happen to be calendar or fiscal, your books should be balanced. And here's that statement again, and it just speaks out to it. Looking out for the big jumps and investigating the discrepancies on a monthly basis, now you're looking for a needle in a pincushion rather than a needle in a haystack. I've had some dealers over the years. I think of a GM dealer down in Georgia that they had 3 GM stores. They did a physical inventory, and the controller called up and he said, I'm really concerned. We were short $36,000 after we did our physical inventory. And these were 3 separate stores. One store was off about 20, one was off about 8, and the other was off about 8, and they were short. I said, okay, well, we can start to look into some of the things that can cause this. And I said, when was the last time you did a physical inventory? And the controller said, we hadn't done one in 5 years. And so as I equated that out and talked with them, I said, you're only 36,000 short between these 3 inventories over a 5-year period. God bless, it literally, as you think about that, and you divide it out over 5 years, they now do monthly reconciliations and physicals and physicals once a year, monthly reconciliations, and they're staying well within range. So when you wait a 5-year period and you're short something like that, that's a big deal. So one of the things I wanted to show you now, and these again are the sheets that you can request based on whatever DMS you have and compare it. If you do a monthly reconciliation, some of these things may show issue that you're not looking at in your parts operation. This is what the parts entry looks like for you, the parts manager, the things that you would put in your month end inventory report, the inventory value at cost at the end of the month, the cores in stock that are new, and depending on your DMS, cores in stock used that might be in transit or still in stock. Typically, there's several DMS vendors such as DealerTrack, PBS, and Rentals. It's very easy to figure out your used car inventory or your used core value. If you're on CDK, they do have a dirty core tracking report, but you actually have to go through a seminar to get it turned on. It's very convoluted. So we typically recommend with CDK until they get something like that fixed, track it on a spreadsheet, something that you can check and go through it when you get the receipt in and you get the credit, post that in and get it out, but have a spreadsheet that shows outstanding dirty cores still in transit or in stock that you can get a dollar value on what you're tracking with that. And the best way on CDK by far is to typically do a spreadsheet. But here are some things, and I'll get to the point why this is so critical and where some of these things get missed, is making sure that you have a folder because there's no way to really go out and click a report that I know of in any DMS that's going to show you your shortages and your damages that you've sent back for credit. You've taken it out of your inventory. You're waiting for a credit, much like a used core, and you want to make sure you've taken it out of your inventory waiting for credit. You want to make sure you add that back into your inventory, because on the accounting side, that dollar value is still there until you get that credit. But on your side, you've reduced the inventory. The other thing is manufacturer returns. You send back $15,000 on a return, you send it back, you're waiting for credit. Well, it's out of your inventory if you minused it out, but credit hasn't been issued yet. Again, you got to add that back into your inventory. You took it out of your inventory. Accounting still has that dollar value. Now, some people where the manufacturer returns may be a little different, and I really try to advocate not to do this, but hey, some controllers and business managers want it this way. They want you to they have a counter ticket or a customer number to create a return. You bill out the parts on the ticket and close it to create a receivable. And now they have that. So if you do something like that, of course, you wouldn't do this. Core returns outstanding. These are the ones that are sent but not issued. That goes back up to that has nothing to do with the new cores in stock used that haven't been shipped back. This would be cores that are in transit, but you haven't got credit yet. And then a real critical one is the invoice, or what we call work in process, on invoice and repair orders. We find a lot of times, I had a dealer one time call me up, again, real life, been 5 or 6 years ago. He had a $600,000 inventory, a Hyundai store. And we sent the inventory report, and he had about $330,000 in inventory. But yet the asset account had $600,000. And he said, I got a really serious problem. I'm way short. Well, I went in and investigated. And by the way, they had a fairly large body shop, but I went in and investigated their work in process, and open repair orders, mainly due to the body shops and the length of time, was $300,000. So when you added up the inventory and the $300,000 in WIP on open repair orders, he had $630,000 on his books. He had just over $600,000. So it was a matter of a very large work in process that sometimes, if you don't state it properly, can make a huge deal. The negative on hand value, with most dealerships, a negative on hand value, if you let it go negative, and I'm going to emphasize this again later, the negative on hand typically in inventory value equals 0. But here's the point, going back up to work in process, if you bill out a part on a counter ticket or a repair order, and now you bill out the part and it goes negative and you special order it, or you're picking it up from another dealer, here's the thing, you've got an invoice or a repair order with this part charged out. It's gone negative. That actually overstates your inventory because the negative equals 0. Okay. But when you go and look at your WIP, it actually comes out as a positive value. If you don't pay attention to your negative on hand, and we had a dealership that when we dealt with this, they were $42,000 in negative on hand they took out. And of course, now they're short. And what we found out at the dealership there was the parts advisors, they were buying tires from a local supplier. They would bring in the tire and bill it out, but never receipt the parts. Their whole negative on hand literally were a bunch of tires from the local tire shop that they properly billed them out and got them done, but then it went negative on hand, quantity of 4 for a set of tires. And now they showed this massive negative on hand because they weren't properly receipting them. So once you get to that number, now we get to the GL, and there are still some items here for you as a parts manager to have to deal with. The accounting general ledger, that's for accounting. But now comes number 11, the packing slips. And if you'll notice off to the right, and this is kind of exploded that says FO over there. That's actually means you should have a folder. If you have any manifests or shippers that you've actually brought into the inventory, accounting needs to add those in. It's in your inventory, it's not in theirs. So now you're adding it to the accounting ledger. Miscellaneous vendor purchases, maybe it's the bulk oil, or maybe it's some parts that you bought from CarQuest or AutoZone or something like that. That's what miscellaneous vendor purchases have. If you've brought that into your inventory, but you haven't turned it into accounting, you need to make sure that dollar value is there to be added to the ledger because it's in your inventory, but it's not in the ledger. Prepaid special orders, with some of the systems, it's nothing more than a note. Remember with prepaid special orders, and this is something to really remember about this because we've had debates about this. You've collected the money. The office has the money, so it's a wash. You don't want to go in and say, oh, I got X amount of prepaid special orders and now add that into the GL when you already got the money based on down in parts. Even if you special ordered and it's prepaid, you still collected the money and closed the ticket, and now it's in the asset account. Parts that have been invoiced but not received yet. Okay. Now that may sound like, well, we're splitting hairs a little bit here. But we had a very big GM store in Arizona that they were constantly $350,000 short every month on a $5 million inventory. And over several months as we went to that, we kept passing over this and finally asking the parts manager and the warehouse manager, I said, are you sure you haven't turned in an invoice where you haven't got the parts yet? Well, the warehouse manager said, oh, heck yeah. We're huge into powertrain, and we put in a couple of truckload orders, and it takes a couple of weeks to get it here. But General Motors cut the invoice because, of course, they cut the shipper and sent it on the invoice, even though it's going to take about 2 weeks to get the truck there. We found their shortage happened to be number 14. The office wrote a check. They still had 2 truckloads of powertrain that hadn't showed up. So could that make a difference? Absolutely. And then number 15, depending on how you do it. And again, we seem to see a 50-50 type approach here is number 15 in depreciation. I highly recommend that this gets booked on a monthly basis. But Blake and I, we had a meeting, 7 months ago, and we had a Honda dealer in New York. They called up and they were constantly growing in their inventory. They were about $70,000 over in the parts operation compared to the accounting GL. As what we discovered, and they happened to be on Dealerville, we were able to go back and run a report on their appreciation over 5 years. It was $70,000. They never booked appreciation. In fact, the controller goes, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, if the manufacturer raises the cost of a part, or God forbid they lower it, but parts appreciate. And the parts manager, he said, I've never run that and given it to her. And she goes, I don't know what you're talking about. They do now, but they found out they were very close, and we were able to balance it by going through that and checking it out. So then you get number 16 and 17 through the 2 things. Now you know where your parts inventory difference over, under whatever, at least you've covered all the bases with potential work in process and an accurate way of making sure you have every little thing that you need on a monthly basis. So, common issues for a negative variance, work in process problems, inaccurate reporting of open repair orders or counter tickets, the WIP, core values, especially dirty cores in transit. We found a ton of people that, we had one dealership in Louisiana, they actually ended up $140,000 over, and they happened to be on Reynolds and Reynolds. And when we ran the 2222 report, the dirty core report, they had about 150,000 outstanding in there. And then we went to the parts manager, said, I don't have access to 2010 to minus the core out, which with Reynolds and Reynolds, it's really simple. You get a core credit, you go to 2010, you put the quantity in the transaction code MC for minus core, it removes the dirty core out of the 2222 report. Well, the controller had went to Harem Scarum school and shut everybody out of 2010 where you had to make those adjustments, and she never did them. Well, after we got that all reconciled again, kumbaya, everything was great. Hey, looks wonderful. Claims for returns, shortages, and damages, as I mentioned back on that sheet, shippers and manifests were not kept in folders till the credit was issued. Inventory depreciated without reporting it in appreciation, a small factor. We've certainly ran into this a handful of times. The manufacturer master tape was not run or not been updating parts. A parts manager may have went and isolated a handful of parts. We typically see this with Freon and bulk oil. They put it in a source that the master tape never updates, which means they have to manually look at and make adjustments based on, if a 55-gallon drum went up or a 30-pound cylinder, making sure based on what you're selling it, you're dividing it out to make sure your cost stays accurate. We have found that a ton of times. Posting errors in the office. A lot of times, you can go through and look at all the posting that goes into asset accounts. And believe me, we found things that have been posted into parts. We found a handful of times used cars were accidentally posted into the part asset account. License plate frames that should have been billed out as an expense to the new car or the used car department. Oh, let's put them in parts. Those are the types of errors that we tend to see. In fact, we had a dealer group that we did some analysis on in Missouri. They had 5 stores and they were consistently going shorter and shorter. Going back and looking at number 3, the shippers and the manifest, one of the things we asked, does the parts manager, did he or she, did they check off their shippers to the invoices that they got weekly from the manufacturer? What we discovered is, oh no, those are handed up to the office and the office does the reconciliation, taking the shippers and the manifest against the invoice. Well, as we went and discovered, and many of you already know this, when you get that parts invoice, they throw a lot of stuff out there. They might throw some service tools on it. They may have a promotion for the sales department. It all goes through that parts invoice and that parts account. And they were billing things that should have been redistributed to different departments. That was all getting added into the parts asset account. So that's another reason why you as a parts manager, having that responsibility, checking it off, and hey, if you don't have a shipper to balance off the invoice, what is it? And potentially, does it have something to do with me? Is it a certain charge? Maybe it's handling fees and it needed to be put to a different account. You sent parts back, they charge you 15%. That should go against an inventory adjustment or a freight account, and it ends up getting in the parts asset account. And then another thing, looking at your plus minus adjustments on a consistent basis, if you constantly have a lot of parts that are being minused out of the system, that's a red flag to either we're not receiving parts properly or potentially we're forgetting to bill parts out or whatnot. That plus minus report is a critical component of making sure that you can stay, active. So the biggest issues for a negative variance that we have seen over the last 7-8 years, parts not being billed out on repair orders. And one of the ways you can know that, and we all work on minimums anymore, so to speak. It seemed after COVID came out, trying to find people is hard enough. But you got people, that it gets very busy in the parts operation. They get, I call it car wars. They get working. And could they forget to bill a part out here or there? Well, the hint here, and this is typically where we found that it was occurring to some degree, no theft going on, just a matter of all of a sudden they had a technician in front of them, the phone rang, they wrote it down, they forgot to bill it out. The hint really comes from your warranty processing clerk or the company. They get a hold of you. He or she, is coming to the parts manager needing parts billed out because the warranty was refused based on the labor op. They didn't have the associated part hooked to it. If they're missing that under warranty occasionally, they're not catching those things on customer pay and internal. So that's one area that just think about it. If you forget to bill $50 worth of parts out a day for whatever, using a round number, times 20 working days, that's $1,000 worth of parts that didn't get billed out, times 12, now you're short $12,000. The other thing, outside purchase accounting. How are emergency purchases from the dealerships being handled? Do you have parts advisors adjust the cost based on the true cost? The extra 10 or 15% that you paid from another dealer? Do you have them adjust the part on the invoice or the repair order? Or do you take that overage and put it to an inventory adjustment account? We've had a handful of dealerships over the years that they asked the parts people to go in and change the cost to what their actual acquisition price was. It wasn't happening. They were just billing it out at regular cost, but they charged that extra 15% they paid from another dealer, they put that into the asset account. Typically, what I highly recommend is you sell it at the true cost, you put that overage in an inventory adjustment account. It saves the counter people, your parts advisors are not trying to manage the cost of the part when they're emergency purchasing it. And I've had people say, well, I want to make sure that doesn't get added into the gross because they got true costs and sale. Nothing says you can't take the inventory asset account and reduce that from the gross when you're paying a commission. So it's much easier to put it to an inventory asset account than rely on parts advisors to make that change. So now let's look at the opposite. Common issues for a positive variance. Over-reporting of open repair orders or counter tickets. Maybe you build out a part number or fat-fingered it. Inventory appreciation without reporting the depreciation. We have this constantly happen 1 or 2 times a month where the manufacturer tape, and Ford is famous for this, even though you put, do not update this particular part number in your DMS, it's like all of a sudden Ford every 3 or 4 months overrides that and now updates, instead of a quart of oil, you got the 55-gallon drum and you got the price, or the Freon, you've got it by the ounce or by the pint. And the next thing you know, it's the 30-pound cylinder for $330 and you've got 16,000 on hand and the inventory more than doubles. Happens all the time, folks. Special orders have not been cleared or filled properly. If you don't fill a special order, if you don't roll it onto a repair order and close it properly, it thinks you sold another part. Now you've got this facetious on hand, and until you actually do a physical, you don't get to zero it out. Number 5, posting errors in the office. That probably is number 2 at least. Increases in products such as bulk oil or Freon, which I covered. And here's another issue, account chaining. And I can count it on more than one hand, folks, but the most recent one was about 8 months ago. We had a Ford dealership that they were constantly going up. And at the point that they were $340,000 over, and the poor parts manager, he literally thought he was going to lose his job over this because it just kept growing. Well, we tried to get access to look at their chart of accounts or whatnot. They were really tight. It was a dealer group. So I even referred them Brooke Samples, who some of you may have heard of Brooke. She's an accounting expert. They still wouldn't do things with her. Finally, reluctantly, after about 7 or 8 months of this thing growing to about $340,000, they gave me access to look at it, and I found the problem in about 5 minutes. They had created an asset account for Isuzu pup trucks, And what was happening was they had set up some of their Ford sale accounts were using the Isuzu asset account. So the Ford asset account is just growing because everything's coming out of the Isuzu pup trucks. And when you went and looked at the Isuzu asset account, it was upside down by that amount. They had had a chaining issue. We found it on 3 different sale accounts. And then we actually found one with Isuzu that was using Ford, but their sales were so minimal, it didn't matter. But it was a matter of a chaining issue. Folks out there in accounting, you have a cost of sale that gets chained in asset account. And validating that chaining is working is ever so critical when you're looking at massive gains or potentially shortages. We found where the asset account was attached to a labor type at one store about 4 or 5 years ago. So that can have a big implication, especially when it's consistently growing. And tracking that monthly, you can find out if that could be part of the problem. I'll back up and deal one more time with negative on hand, only to make an emphasis based on what I told you with the parts advisors selling tires, but never receiving them in, and the numbers just went negative. Again, if you're going to use that negative on hand as an accurate number, most of the time, a negative on hand should have been a pre-built part that you don't have and the office doesn't have, unless it's prepaid. But this is you billing out a part to special order the part, and the repair order or the counter ticket is open. Remember, it's not in your inventory. It's certainly not in their inventory. And that's where accuracy with negative on hand is so critical. And that's why we highly recommend you look at your negative on hand report every day to make sure it's not being abused or misused in the wrong direction. All right. So getting down to the crux of everything, and if any of you are controllers here, you'll love me about this, but we certainly have found this. Approximately 80% of all inventory issues are posting issues in accounting. Again, who reconciles the weekly shippers or invoices? One of the things when you're doing a reconciliation, and I really base this on the AutoNation rule that AutoNation dealers follow. And it makes sense. They're a publicly traded company, and they had the Sarbanes-Oxley, or what they call the SOX rule, in genuinely reporting asset accounts or whatnot. And with AutoNation, they do monthly reconciliations. At least I think they still do. I haven't talked to anybody at AutoNation for several years. But if they're out around 3%, either way, they're short 3% or they're over 3% or within that range, they book it. It's okay. If they're out around 3% for 3 successive months, it triggers a new fiscal inventory to find out what's going on. So one of the things you as a parts manager, based on that sheet, those pages we went through, if you're accurately reporting it and you're sending that up to the office and doing it every month, if you're within 3% either way, you really don't need to go dig for it. If it's consistently growing and gets outside of it, that's again finding the needle in a pincushion rather than a haystack. Okay. And that's why you want to do it monthly to figure that kind of stuff out. Where we find, and this goes way back to that one slide that says, parts manager, find the issue. You're over or you're short. Controllers, you think about what they go through at a month end. Business managers and controllers, they're worried, they're working on a whole bunch of things. Payroll, closing out the month end financial statement for new car, used car, F&I, service, parts, all of those things. The last thing a controller really wants to stop and do is focus on a parts reconciliation issue. And so it's really easy to hand it off to the parts manager, and all of a sudden the parts manager, I laugh about it because it's like all of a sudden they expect the parts manager to be an instant CPA. You scratch your head and you go, typically all I worry about is I buy and receive parts and I sell parts. And now you want me to, what's going on? And a lot of times that's kind of passing the buck to give them time to finish the things that they need. I've got a few chuckles out of controllers and business managers when I mention that, and they go, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happens. But if you get a process down to where it can be done, you as a parts manager at month end can put that monthly reconciliation form together with your numbers in about 15, 20 minutes and hand it off to the controller to make those numbers, you get to give good, accurate numbers at month end. What sits in the middle there is some of the things the office might have has not been posted off. That's the reason for the 3% fudge, is when you stop and do a physical inventory, that now forces the office to make sure everything's caught up and posted correctly. During a regular month to month being a little off, some of the things in accounting may not be as accurate as the numbers that you're supplying. So here's a checklist for a successful reconciliation. On a daily basis, review that negative on hand so that it's realistic and it's not being abused. The plus minus report, looking at how many manual adjustments you're making. Potentially special orders aren't being corrected, parts aren't getting receipted properly. Review the override report for cost changes. Just making sure, based on whatever your policy might be, that you're reviewing the override report. A lot of people look at it for sales. One of my parts advisors overriding as far as overriding a matrix or whatnot, but you know what? It's just as critical. They should never be overriding cost changes unless something's really wrong. Reviewing your outside purchases and how do you account for that overage at cost, making sure they're getting coded to an asset account, or if the cost is being overridden, are they truly changing it to what they purchased it for? On a weekly basis, check the open invoice report. We've seen some open ROs 2-3 years old sometimes with parts hanging on them, and you just wonder what's going on. And the service manager usually has to eat crow and they forgot to do something or build it out on another repair order. Reviewing the dirty cores and the credits, keeping that accurate is critical. And I wouldn't say on a weekly basis, this probably should be down on a monthly basis. Do a physical inventory on your special order bin. Typically, most people have a set of bins that they keep their special orders in. Do a physical inventory on just the special order bins to make sure they're staying accurate and that special orders got rolled onto repair orders or counter tickets properly. On a monthly basis, make sure you got your folders and your numbers ready to prep for a month-end reconciliation. And again, if you're locking down the price on some of your bulk oil items, such as bulk oil and Freon, make sure pricing has not changed or been updated to make sure that remains accurate. And again, report restocking fees that are charged by the manufacturer. We've certainly seen where restocking fees get posted against the asset account when realistically they should have been put to an expense account. So that is a great checklist for all this monthly reconciliation. And with that being said, we'll open it up for questions. There's got to be a couple of questions out there based on everything we ran through. If some of you have not experienced good or clean reconciliations, going back through this gives you some ideas. Again, if you need a sheet that goes through all the detail, making sure that you have accurate folders for shippers and used cores and whatnot. If you're not doing part of that, more than likely that's going to throw your inventory off and in most cases make you short. So anyway, with that, we're at 45 minutes. Bingo. I want to say thank you to everybody who listened. There's a lot of you on here that I appreciate you listening. And again, there are no dumb questions here, folks. And that's what we're here for. You know, if you want to bounce something off of us or, we would love to hear from you, please. So Kaylee?
Thank you. Wow, Chuck, that was awesome. Even a minute early from the goal. We haven't settled on a topic for next month. Again, for those of you who haven't joined any of these webinars, we do try to do these, or we do these once a month on the second Thursday. And we were playing around with the idea of talking about matrix pricing again. We kind of just recently did that, so I'm not sure if it's too soon to cover it. We're always looking for suggestions, so if you guys want to send them. And then, yeah, again, if you want the form, just email info@PartsEdge and I will send it over to you. I've already seen a few come to the inbox. So, Chuck, do you want to add anything?
No, not really. No.
Chuck, Michael has a question.
Oh, I missed that. Sorry. Thank you.
If you have a tire consignment, where are you accounting for that on your sheet?
Well, Michael, typically with consignment, I guess interstate battery might have been, that would overstate an inventory if you go ahead and put an on-hand quantity with a value, but you really don't get billed for it until you actually sell it. That would be something, Michael, you would want to add as a line item, that's an overstated inventory. So that would be a new line to add in, Michael. But we used to do that with interstate batteries. They'd deliver 15, 20 batteries, and you never paid for it until they came in and went, oh, you sold 3 of the 20 batteries. So there was no value in the other 17 batteries, even though you do have a cost and a sale price. And that would be something that you'd want to have, call it a consignment line item, to make sure that that's subtracted out of the inventory in the lower portion. Good point. Any other questions?
I think we're good now. So we will send out the recording in a couple of weeks and we will put out some information on the next one we're going to do. Thank you all for joining. And if you have any other questions, you can always email us at info@PartsEdge.
Yep. All right, everybody. Well, have a great day. Good luck. Good selling. And thanks for tuning in. And we'll talk to you next month.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.